will be quite simple. I'll introduce each of the candidates in succession, and they're going to speak about different topics. They've all chosen something to specialise in. And then at the end we'll have Paul, and then we'll go on to questions, if we have any at the end. So, what I'd like to do is, are we using this mic? Yes? Right. From South Ribble, the parliamentary candidate for South Ribble, Dr. David Gallagher.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I've typed my speech out. I was going to do it a cappella, but I've been chasing around all over Hayward and Middleton today, and so I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do something on transport and a little bit on education afterwards. The education I'm just going to make up. I've not got any written notes on that. Okay, I'll just say a few words, introductory words about myself and why I'm standing for UKIP in South Ribble. My father, uncle and grandfather on that side were all window cleaners who all fought in the First and Second World Wars and worked into their 80s to provide for their families. My grandfather was originally from Wigan, where he had at one point clog dance with Charlie Chaplin, and my great-grandfather was a steeplejack who died in a chimney accident in Wigan, an early fatality. He fell into a chimney. I've always been a keen linguist and musician, writing my own music and songs, and I've worked in a variety of roles over the years: financial services, as a social worker in Berlin, a judo instructor, a translator, and latterly as an editor and a local councillor. It's always been an interesting life, but an extremely hard one at times. With the ping-pong politics of Conservative Labour Lib Lab pacts, and more recently coalition Lib Con pacts, causing mass immigration since 2000, which is destroying our public services, placing unsustainable burdens on our health, welfare and educational systems, UKIP are now the only realistic alternative to the old established parties. Nationally, of course, we want to leave the EU, abolish HS2, and have many strategies in place to restore the NHS, our broken education system, fix the unsustainable levels of immigration, and repair our broken economy. We are also the one party who now represents the people, and all around the country we have UKIP candidates standing with the interests of people at their heart, rather than just their own self-interest first. With our refreshing attitude, we hope to blow away the traditional Westminster establishment and cause a purple revolution on the 7th of May, and with your help and support, we will do just that. Turning to local issues in South Ribble, proposed solar farms such as in Maudsley, housing developments planned to be built on Greenbelt, and repairing our creaking roads all over South Ribble are my priorities. And so transport is a major issue here, and I also want to say a word about our national policy on transport, and a few of my own personal views on education, and a little bit about our policy on education. I'd first like to outline a few core aspects of UKIP's transport policy before moving on to consider the more localised South Ribble issues. Our 5 main priorities nationally are: we will scrap HS2, we oppose tolls on public roads and will let existing contracts for running toll roads expire, and we will maintain pensioner bus passes. We will require foreign vehicles to purchase a Brit disc before entry to the UK in order to contribute to the upkeep of UK roads and any lost fuel duty. UKIP will also ensure that speed cameras, which many of you have seen around at the moment, and those yellow vans parked everywhere, are used as a deterrent and not as a revenue raiser for local authorities. Very recent support for our plan to scrap the HS2 vanity project has come from the House of Lords. The House of Lords Economic Affairs Committee's report says that the government has no convincing case for spending £50 billion building the HS2 rail link between London and the north. Lord Hollick, who's a Labour peer, and Lord McFall, Labour Cooperative, were particularly vocal in condemning the project to our delight. And the report was welcomed by our Deputy Leader Paul Nuttall MEP, who's with us tonight, and who's very keen to see the HS2 project hit the buffers, as our Transport spokesman Jill Seymour MEP is also campaigning against it. This flawed EU vanity project has no mandate from the British people whatsoever, and really, indeed, although these two Labour peers point to reality, Shadow Secretary for Transport Michael Duggar has confirmed that Labour do in fact still support HS2, though they will not write out a blank cheque. Lord Hollick, chairman of the Lords Committee, said that overcrowding on the West Coast mainland was largely a problem on commuter trains and on long-distance services on Friday nights and some weekends. The government have not carried out a proper assessment of whether alternative ways of increasing capacity are more cost-effective than HS2, he said. In terms of rebalancing, London is likely to be the main beneficiary from HS2. And indeed, I was speaking to a gentleman today who is standing in Cumbria, one of our candidates, John Stanier, and he was telling me the HS2 network will run right the way through his whole constituency without even stopping. So he's trying to convince his constituents that paint is something they're not actually going to use. So it's quite an interesting topic, the HS2. £50 billion, where we'd rather just spend it on local rail improvements, transport services. I'm sure many of you will experience late trains, the creaking trains that run between Ormskirk and Preston, ridiculously with minimum carriages available. Mainly the transport system needs a complete and utter upgrade. But what else is happening there is that investment in improving rail links in the North England might deliver much greater economic benefit at a fraction of the cost, it was argued. But, this Lords report echoed a similar report published by the Commons Public Accounts Committee in January. So the MPs said then that ministers lacked a clear strategic plan for the rail network and were sceptical about whether HS2 would deliver value for money. The £50 billion price tag included a generous contingency that could be used to mask cost increases, they added. I mean, basically, we need to fight against this outrageous waste of money, which will only serve to help the Westminster elite get to their conferences in the north a little quicker. Secondly, UKIP opposes tolls on public roads and will let existing contracts for running toll roads expire. On the 24th of March, UKIP held an action day to scrap the tolls, which are highway robbery. Party activists delivered the message by unfurling huge banners at a series of Scrap the Tolls demonstrations on road toll sites across the UK. And it's particularly in Shropshire and Staffordshire there were UKIP members congregating at the Mill Lane Bridge over the M6 toll at Cheslin Hay in the West Midlands. Again, our UKIP transport spokesperson Jill Seymour MEP spoke out against the injustice of tolls on our roads and the highway robbery that entails. We all agree that drivers are already paying more than enough taxes to deserve free access to the entire UK transport network. So what do most people want from their trains? Well, the feedback I'm getting is that most people who travel long distances to work and commute long distances want cheaper fares, seeks to sit on at commuter time, and a train that's fit for the 21st century. They want better local infrastructure on the railways, more comfortable carriages, rail times which are adhered to without constant changes, and no more unnecessary interruptions to the timetable and travel schedules. Instead of financing HS2, we can rebuild our train networks to their former glory. And as for the road infrastructure, the road networks all over South Ribble, think of the potholes, the terrible pavements, the narrow pavements which are awful for our elderly and disabled to navigate. 20 years of neglect at least by the County Council, who I hold responsible for that. And they're all over South Ribble, in Longton, Eccleston, Maudsley, Taunton, Hesketh Bank and North Meals. The list just goes on and on. So that's what I'd say about transport. As regards education, I did manage to get into a good school. I worked very hard. I always brought my homework home with me. And so I managed to get into university. So I had 4 years at university, Nottingham University to begin with. And what I would say about university is, if poorer people can get grammar school education and get into grammar schools, they've just got a better chance in the future. And it's appalling that the grammar schools have been taken away from us, from the Labour Party. I have a background as an academic because although I worked when I left, I had a couple of years in financial services firstly, and then I worked for a long time in insurance. After 11 years of that, I went back. I'd done a couple of GCSEs in my spare time, so I decided to double up and do a couple of languages. I got back to university. So I got into Cambridge, unbelievably. So I did 4 years at Cambridge, 1 at Oxford doing a master's, and then I broke my back and I went home to recover, and I did a PhD from home for 4 years. And then I wrote a book, and followed by 6 more edited collections, hoping to be a lecturer. And then I tried to be a teacher as well, and then when I didn't get the sort of support of my local MP, who was a Labour MP, that sort of projected me into politics. I don't think the school system that we have, the education system, is the one that we deserve and our children deserve and families deserve. Quite frankly, I'm a governor of a local school, and as an academic, trying to understand quite what some of the teachers are doing with this key stage 1, 2, 3, 4 palaver, and basically a whole load of targets that they seem to be teaching to targets, seem to have forgotten how to teach the pupils and teach. They call them students now, even if they're 6 or 7 years of age. But it seems just for basically they're teaching small classes of children. It would be better if they taught them the actual subjects, you know, so they could maths, English, so that they could progress when they get to secondary school. And even though sometimes they fail targets, they still want rewarding in the pay structures at schools, which I think is wrong. They try and lobby for it to get extra pay, even though they've not met their own targets. Now, in all the other jobs that I've ever worked in, performance-related pay. If you don't meet your target, you don't get an increase. But I think the Labour culture that had entered our schools and the plans that they have destroyed state education, quite frankly, over the last 15 to 20 years. And we've had Conservatives had a chance, didn't they? Since '97 we had 13 years of Labour, then we've had 4 years of promises from the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, the so-called coalition, and we can all see how that's working out. I think most people now are realising it, that basically if you want a party who's going to get behind you and cares about what's happening and will address the real issues and be, you know, honest in what's happening in our schools or our transport, you need to vote for the UK Independence Party. And thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Next one, who's been struggling with her voice for the last week. Perhaps she needs to go to see a doctor, because she's going to talk on the NHS. Are you okay? Yeah. You're candidate for the Ribble family, and I've just reminded myself that we are actually in the Ribble Valley tonight. Shirley Parkinson.
Good evening, everybody. As you can probably tell, I've got a chest infection. No, I'm not saying that close, it reverberates. I've only just got my voice back, so bear with me. Hopefully I'll get through the speech without losing my voice, okay? Health. Everyone hopes that they will have good health. but it's a fact, and I'm proof, that at some point in our lives we will all need the services of a medical professional. In 1948, Labour had one of its few good ideas, the creation of a National Health Service. Quality health care from cradle to grave, free at the point of delivery and funded entirely from taxation, meaning that people paid into it according to their means, for the benefit of everyone. The treatment by a doctor was no longer the privilege of the rich. I wonder what the Labour Party of 1948 would think of the shameful way the current Labour Party has used this service as a political football. So let's get rid, right now, of the Labour lies and put the record straight. Lie number 1, UKIP will charge you to see your GP. No, we will not. But Labour just might. Lord Warner, Labour's former Minister for the State Department of Health in Tony Blair's government, has said that everyone who pays prescription charges should also pay £10 a month NHS subscription and £20 a night if you have to stay in the hospital. In August 2014, another Labour peer, Lord Winston, goes a step further by suggesting a £200 charge for patients to see their GP, so that we would learn to appreciate the NHS. This is a disgrace. The British people already pay for this service and recognise and appreciate the dedicated professionals that work in it. Labour line number 2. UKIP will privatise the NHS. No, we will not. UKIP is committed to a free public NHS. The fact is that privatisation of the NHS started under the Labour government with Blair's Private Finance Initiative, or PFIs. A scheme, I might add, invented by the Conservatives to get private companies to build and run hospitals and other public assets at a huge profit. Last year, the bill for NHS PFIs was £628.7 million. I'll repeat that, £628.7 million. And that was in England alone. Often PFIs include expensive contracts that cost upwards of £300 just to change a light bulb. Between 1997 and 2010, the Labour government signed more than 100 PFI contracts in the health service, worth more than £79 billion. Contracts that make private companies very, very rich indeed. UKIP will stop further use of PFIs in the NHS and encourage local authorities to buy out those PFIs early. The NHS doesn't belong to any political party. It doesn't belong to any British government or the EU commissioners. It belongs to us, the British people. There is no denying that our NHS is at breaking point. Endless top-down reorganisations have drained it of cash and taken place not because of clinical need, but political opportunism. The established parties are willfully ignoring the fact that the NHS should not be about politics, but about people. The people who work in it, but most importantly, us, the people who use it. So how did we get in this mess? I'm going to tell you a true story. A couple get married late in life and want to have a family. After tests, they're informed that they'll need medical intervention and help. And they will need to pay for the treatment themselves because the lady is over 35 years old and therefore not eligible for the IVF treatment on the NHS. Using a family inheritance, the couple go ahead. Unfortunately, the treatment fails. The couple are told there's only one option left, a procedure called ICSI. But the chances of success would be less than 10%, and again, the treatment would not be available on the NHS because of the lady's age. The couple take the decision to sell their home and downsize so that they can afford one attempt. This time, the treatment is successful, and the couple are blessed with their miracle baby. Lying in the hospital after giving birth, the lady is in the traditional 4-cubicle ladies, and the lady in the next bed was from a different country. The doctor says to the lady in the next bed, "How long have you been in the country?" The lady replies, "3 weeks. We came for a baby number." Sadly, an NHS number opens the door to access many of UK's welfare benefits. The Department of Health estimates the cost of health tourism to the NHS at £2 billion and rising. UKIP will stamp out health tourism by insisting that migrants, students and visitors to Britain must have as a condition of entry approved medical insurance. Our health service is a national health service, not an international health service. It is not fair to expect British taxpayers to pay for foreign nationals to use the NHS. It currently costs British taxpayers £1 million a week in child benefit for children who do not live in this country. UKIP will not give NHS numbers to overseas visitors. Only once they have contributed through taxation for 5 years will their requirement for health insurance expire. We will spend £2 million of the £2 billion saved from health tourism to scrap hospital car parking charges, which are nothing more than a tax on the sick and the vulnerable. Nearly a year later, this couple's miracle baby is taken ill. They take the child to the GP, who suspects croup, and they are told if symptoms get worse, take the child straight to A&E. A couple of hours later, they do just that. They rush this child to A&E. Croup is confirmed, and they are taken into a treatment room to wait for a paediatric doctor. An hour later, the couple are asked to go back and wait in the main waiting room for the paediatric doctor, who still hadn't arrived, as they need the room. The couple return to the main waiting area, which is now bursting at the seams. Another hour passes, and the mother becomes very concerned about the welfare of her baby. And she goes in search of the A&E sister. And when the sister sees the mother and child, her words are, "Oh, I forgot about you. I'll send for a porter," she says, "to take you up." "I don't need a porter," says the mum. "Just tell me where the ward is." "I can't do that," said the sister, "because of health and safety rules." 10 minutes later, a porter finally arrives. What happens next is every parent's nightmare. On arrival at the ward, the sister says to the porter, "Why isn't this child on oxygen?" The child is then taken from the mother, rushed to intensive care, and for the next 24 hours battles for her life. At one point in those 24 hours, the mother counts 14 medical personnel on standby for emergency surgery for this 1-year-old baby. Thankfully, this time, tragedy is averted and the child survives, but the next family might not be so lucky. I said these were true stories, but how do I know they were true? Because I am that mother, and the child that nearly died was mine. UKIP's health policy has been created by a think tank. Hasn't been created by a think tank. With the assistance of personnel from the NHS, from all over the service, our NHS policy truly puts the patient at its centre. The NHS needs more staff, but it's not fair to take them from countries who need them just as much, if not more, than we do. We must train more nurses and more medical personnel of our own. UKIP will do this by scrapping tuition fees for medical students. We will allow nurses to train back on the wards and reinstate state-enrolled nurses to encourage more homegrown medical talent. Auxiliary staff will also be given the opportunity to work towards becoming SENs. UKIP also pledges £3 billion to the NHS direct to frontline services. UKIP also, as a policy pledge, will fund dementia funding research to £130 million a year, £650 million over the Parliament. Double Tories' pledge, and in line with the Alzheimer's research, UK's saying what they need. We will make it so that management have a licence to manage. As doctors and nurses are licensed, so should medical management. This would negate the drift of disgraced hospital managers being fired only to find another job elsewhere within our health service. We would abolish the Quality Care Commission inspections, would be taken up by local health boards, who would also be encouraged to take evidence from whistleblowers and patients with grievances. The media have closed down more failing establishments than the Quality Care Commission. We will merge health and social care as a priority to enable more joined-up, integrated patient management. An elderly social care fund. We will put £1 billion per year into that. Thank you.
How many times do you hear that UKIP don't have any policies? Well, you've just heard that we have a lot of policies on NHS. Thank you, Shirley. Our next guest up is Ivy's agent, by the way. He owes it all to me. The parliamentary candidate for Chorley, Mark Smith.
Good evening. Might take me a few minutes to get you position this microphone. That's close enough, Jeff. You all hear me okay? Good.
You hear him, John?
My name's Mark Smith, as Jeff said. I'm standing for Chorley. The reason I'm standing and working with UKIP is because personally I've become so dissatisfied and disaffected with the complete failure of politicians to both do what they say and tell the truth. After you've spent a lot of years, as I'm sure we all have, sat shouting at the TV, shouting at question time, getting increasingly annoyed at the things they say they're going to do, then the minute they're in power don't do, you've got to do something about it. We've decided to do something about it by working with UKIP to try and change the system. Everybody else can do something about it by voting or by supporting those who are trying to change the system. The subject I'm going to speak about this evening is immigration and the economy. Not, as Jeff said, a specialist subject, but one that Jeff told me I was speaking about. Immigration is a word which has only made its way really into the political vocabulary in the last few years. It's now one of the top 3 concerns for voters, along with the economy and the NHS, in polls over the last year or so. But how did immigration actually get into the political agenda and to become a key issue that all parties feel they need to address directly? When UKIP raised this issue as a major concern, we were denounced as racists and Little Englanders. And it was certainly not a subject being discussed on the tired old politicians who inhabit the Labour and Tory benches. So what does immigration mean in the UK today, and does it matter?
Yeah.
What are the effects of immigration, given that everybody says historically immigration has been a good thing for the UK? It's helped us develop into the cosmopolitan society which we are now, but only when the people who arrive believe in our values, believe in our culture, and like us, believe in Britain. Controlled immigration is therefore, we would argue, a positive thing for any developed society. However, uncontrolled immigration, particularly at the rate seen in recent years in the UK, is not. Immigration on this scale has many impacts, some of which are obvious and some of which are less obvious. The 300,000 net migration in the last year evidences a system which is completely out of control. Given that the average during the 90s was 30,000 a year, that's 10 times as many net migrants every year. That's a huge number of people. When you hear this talked about very glibly on political programmes and in speeches, it's just another statistic. 300,000 people is a lot of people. It's also a fact that of that migration during 2014, the 224 of those were migrants who came to work. It matters on jobs, where the increase in the available labour pool provides more choice for employers and allows them to offer potentially less attractive terms to workers. Given the basic economics of supply and demand, it's clear when the supply goes up, there's more workers, then the wages and conditions potentially go down. This leads directly to wage compression, And whilst that can also be caused by high levels of unemployment, in the UK, we believe it's caused by the uncontrolled immigration from the EU. Immigration matters on housing because high levels of net migration lead to an increase in demand for housing. Following the same basic concept of economics, if the demand goes up more quickly than supply, the prices go up. That's not the only cause of increase in housing demand in the UK, because families now are far more varied than they were perhaps once. The type of housing we need for this change in demographic is increasing, and the increasing age of our population needs to be catered for as well. However, the uncontrolled inward migration makes this more difficult and requires the building of large numbers of houses. Now, rising house prices might be a great thing for those who own their own house, but our children and our grandchildren may not be so lucky. Increasing house prices drive ownership increasingly out of their reach. We're probably the first generation who will not be able to, where our children will not be able to do as well economically as we did. And that's our responsibility. We've let that happen. Immigration matters on schools, where the numbers are obvious. If you have a growing population, the pressure on schools has increased. This causes both rising class numbers and also the inability of parents to get their children into their first choice. There's over 300 languages represented in British schools today. Whilst diversity can be a good thing, a huge influx both of new cultures and languages into an area in a short time can swamp and stifle the inherent local culture and lead to segregation rather than integration and harmony. That's not a good thing. And immigration really matters when the topic under discussion is the economy, as that's where the impacts, I feel, can really be seen, and some of the reluctance of the governments and opposition to tackle this problem may perhaps be more apparent. We hear each and every day how the economy is growing and that we're doing so much better than others. And whilst that may be true, the causes of that growth need to be investigated. For the number of people who are actually working versus the available number of people to work, which is called the participation rate in ONS terms, hasn't changed in the last 15 years. It's stayed the same at about 78%. The number of self-employed people, however, has risen by 700,000 since the recession, in part because people can't find jobs that pay a decent living wage because of the wage compression referred to. The coalition have claimed that the economy has created 1,000 jobs a day, or they would say they've created 1,000 jobs a day. But unemployment during that period has only actually dropped by 600,000. And 600,000 isn't 1.8 million, which is the jobs that would have been created if their 1,000 a day was correct. However, net migration during that period has added almost 1.5 million people to the population. So it's clear where the jobs have gone. The growth in GDP in the UK economy then is driven to quite a large extent by immigration and the low-paid jobs that it's brought. It sounds like great news. All the recent immigrants are working, adding to our economic growth. However, our productivity, that's the amount of GDP we produce per head, is going down and not up. That hasn't happened since the end of World War II. A thriving, growing modern economy increases its GDP partly by increasing the productivity of workers. We all remember the stories of high-tech jobs that were going to be all over Britain. We're going to make in so much more per worker. We're not doing that anymore. The productivity is going down. Another factor in this, which is often overlooked, is that in addition to the wage compression, the fact that a lot of people are on relatively low-paid jobs, we're now paying a large proportion of our welfare bill to the employed people, to people who are working. And whilst there's a lot of talk in the government about reducing the payments made to unemployed people, they're actually a very small proportion of the welfare bill. This whole economic story clearly is fairly complicated, and statistics can be read in many ways by many people. So I've tried to summarise it in a few, I think, short points. I hope that anyway. As I mentioned, in large part, the economic growth that we found in the last few years has been driven by this low-cost labour immigrating from the EU. None of the other parties can control this immigration, because whilst you're in the EU, you can't do anything about it. And the figures in terms of how many jobs have come off the unemployment register versus how many new jobs have been created don't lie. These jobs, as I mentioned, are generally low productivity, based on the recent ONS productivity figures which came out this week. The government is then propping up these low-paid jobs through the benefit system. And despite the cost of living crisis and the claims that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, the bottom 10% of the working people are actually earning more money than they were at the start of the coalition, according to the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Benefit spending, however, has increased 60% in real terms over the past 15 years. It's rocketing. Our welfare spending of 215 billion includes payments to retired people around 87, 90 billion. Of the remaining 128 billion, 60%, 76 billion, that's almost the deficit currently, remember, is paid to people who are working. These in-work benefits have created insane incentives to work less and claim more. You need to work at least 24 hours between you as a couple to qualify for working tax credits. And if you look at some analysis done recently by James Ferguson, the economist, it's surprising to note that of the 29 or 30 million people employed, almost a third, 9 million, are employed on part-time contracts. The average hours worked, you'll not be surprised to hear, is 12 hours. With the current deficit at 90 billion in this financial year, we're effectively borrowing money to pay for in-work benefits because we allow an uncontrolled level of immigration to keep wages down. We're also borrowing money to fund overseas aid and membership of the EU, while we ration drug treatments to our own people. In management theory, it's a well-known fact that you always get what you incentivise, but not necessarily what you want. Immigration matters in our NHS, as Shirley's mentioned. We're sending teams of people overseas to recruit extra staff because we're not training enough. We need more of these due to the increased population caused by this uncontrolled immigration. I've heard it said on, I don't know how many debate programmes, and I'm sure you have, that the NHS could not operate without the level of migrant workers we have in the NHS. That's true. But is it really something to be proud of, that we pull skilled workers away from countries who need these workers more than we do, while we fail to train our own people and instead incentivise them to take part-time jobs or remain unemployed? It's lunacy, and so it matters a lot. So what will UKIP do about these issues, and what will the benefits be? The answers aren't really as complicated as they're made out to be sometimes, and can be expressed fairly simply. Firstly, we need to get control of our borders to allow us to get the people we need and to stop unskilled or low-skilled workers flooding into Britain. In order to achieve this, of course, we need to leave the EU. That will save financially £8 to £10 billion a year. UKIP are looking to introduce an Australian-style point system, which I'm sure you've all heard of in the news. This will allow us to selectively have immigrants which meet the skill needs that we have in the country, and who come in based on their quality and need, not just based on where they live in Europe. Migrants will only be eligible for benefits, in-work or out-of-work benefits, after they've been paying into the system for 5 years. You've heard it before. You shouldn't take out until you've put in. We're also, as Shirley mentioned, going to stop health tourism by insisting on insurance for visitors and migrants to the UK. That in itself will save up to 2 billion, although the figure's not known, so it could be more. So immigration matters a lot to this country, and when we raise it, the establishment try to drown our voice. We think that the current system unfairly and improperly discriminates against people from outside the EU is unjust, unfair and unacceptable. Why should somebody from India, Australia or America be treated as a second-class citizen compared to somebody from Poland, Czechoslovakia or Romania? We should treat all people the same. If we continue as we are with current levels of net migration, our population could be 75 million in 30 years' time. Each new entrant, we need a school place, a hospital bed, a doctor, a policeman, roads, sewers, everything that you need to provide for a population. Why do we need to have restaurants which are full of waiters from Eastern Europe when we've got 1.8 million unemployed people? Can we not train people to do those jobs? Why do we need to build new schools and hospitals when our birth rate was around 1.85 per couple in the 1990s? The population should be rising because we're living longer, which is great, but not by 300,000 a year from migration. We're tearing up vast tracts of our countryside to build houses for new entrants who are causing our productivity to fall, not to rise. The fall in productivity, as I mentioned, is the first since World War II. It's unprecedented in our history. We should focus on tackling this issue. Labour say that the people can't be trusted with a referendum on Europe. The Tories say they will ask you the question when they've renegotiated aspects of the EU which are non-negotiable. Ask Angela Merkel or Hollande. UKIP believes the people of Britain should decide their own future and make their own laws through our elected parliament. As I've been canvassing around Chorley recently, many people have said to me, however I vote, it won't change anything. There's just no point. And one of the most overused quotations is that insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. The British people have been doing that for some considerable time. A vote for the out-of-touch Westminster elite will always produce the same thing, whether it's a red or a blue vote. Politics in Britain has changed forever, and all agree that's due to the rise in UKIP. That's because we believe in real change, and we believe in Britain. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So that's the three candidates that you've heard from: Chorley, South Ribble Valley, and South Ribble. What I'd like to introduce now is our MEP, Paul Nuttall, who came. Did you come top of the vote in last May? Yes, of course you did. One of our three MEPs in the North West, I'm glad to say. 3 MEPs. It used to be 1, it's now 3. Mr. Paul Nuttall.
Good evening, everyone. And I must say thank you very much for organising this meeting on the same night as Liverpool playing Blackburn in the final of the FA Cup. So if there's any updates, please shout them over to me. I'm quite confident that I'll be at the semi-final in April. It's great to be home. I mean, I've been basically told by the party that my job during this election is to go around the country and to speak at public meetings north to south, as far north as Blythe, as far south as Poole, and I've been doing 65 in the road to this election, and it's just great now to be back in my own constituency of the northwest of England. And I must say that I'm very proud about how this constituency or this region has developed over the past 7 or 8 years. If you consider that when I took over the leadership of the region back in 2008, we had 850 members. We've now got over 3,500. Back then we had no councillors whatsoever. We've now got over 20 councillors. I became an MEP in 2009. Now we have 3 of probably the most leading and frontline MEPs in the country, in Stephen Wolfe, Louise Bowes and myself. And the other 2, I must say in particular, are pretty much excellent. You see them on television, you hear them on radio. I think we've got the best MEP team in the whole of the country. How many of you, by the way, are UKIP members? Hands up. Okay, so there's a fair few who are. Let me just take you on a quick history of the party, because I think it's important that you understand where the party has come from to get a grasp, really, of where we're going. UKIP is a baby in political terms in comparison to the other political parties. You've got a Conservative Party which is over 200 years old. You've got a Liberal Party which was born out of the 1850s with Palmerston. Obviously it then morphed into the Liberal Democrats, but you know its origins were in the 1850s. You've got a Labour Party which was born under Keir Hardie, which is over 100 years old. UKIP was only born in 1993 in the London School of Economics, and it didn't have a great decade really in the 1990s. It fell under the radar. In fact, it was superseded by another political party really, which was called the Referendum Party, which was run by a guy called Jimmy Goldsmith, who unfortunately died in 1997. And then UKIP really came to the fore. And it came to the fore in the European elections of 1999, when we finished 4th in those elections and got 3 MEPs elected to the European Parliament. One of those MEPs being Nigel Farage. If anyone sees the photographs of Nigel Farage in 1999, he is a whippersnapper, to say the least. We then came back in 2004, and we finished third in the European elections, got 12 MEPs elected to the European Parliament. And we got about 16% of the vote. We then came back in 2009, and we finished second in the European elections, beating the Brown government of the day. So really, in last year's European elections, there was only one place to go. And we did it. We came first. We got 24 MEPs elected to the European Parliament. We got over 25% of the vote. We became the first political party since 1906 to go on and win a national election that hasn't been either the Labour Party or the Conservatives. We made political history. But there is something which has been constant and nagging about UKIP's history. And it is that it does well in European elections and then disappears. And then comes back 5 years later and does well in European elections and then disappears back to about 2%. But this hasn't happened this time round. I became the chairman of UKIP back in 2008. And when I became the chairman, we had 14,000 members. And we were falling month on month. There were 3 opinion polls on the bounce over the summer of 2008 where we didn't appear at all. And the reason why we didn't appear is because we were below 1%. You cannot compare that to now. You look at where we are, for example, in terms of membership. We have 43,500 members now, more than the Liberal Democrats. We're now polling, on average, 15%. And you will read in the newspapers people saying, oh, well, UKIP is dipping in the polls. Well, put it this way. If someone would have offered me, the day after the European elections, that we, with 28 days to go to the general election, would be polling 15%, I would have bitten your hand off. We know there's going to be a natural squeeze, but that doesn't matter, because this is a first past the post election. What matters is how we're doing in those target seats. And didn't we do well after the European elections, when people thought that we would fall again? Well, there were 3 by-elections after that election. The first, in Clacton, Douglas Carswell, standing as a UKIP candidate, got the biggest swing in British political history and was elected. On the same day, we had a by-election in Haywood and Middleton, where John Bickley came within 617 votes of taking a safe Labour seat here in the north of England. And what that proved to me, personally, is that UKIP is a truly national party. It does as well in the south as it does in the north. It does as well in conservative areas as it does in Labour. It appeals to middle class people, working class people. It's not red, it's not blue. It is simple, common sense. And then we went on with Mark Reckless. And Mark was elected in Rochester as a UKIP MP. We now have 2 MPs in the House of Commons. We now have, if you count all levels of councillor, 1,000 councillors up and down the country. We now have 3 members of the House of Lords. I'm sure it will be more in the near future. This is a party on the move, ladies and gentlemen, and it is a party which is connecting with working people up and down the land. And the reason why it's connecting is because we're talking simple, common sense. Politics has moved on. It's not about the politics of deference anymore. It's about the politics of empathy. It's about having an MP that looks and sounds and acts like a normal person, who gives a straight answer to a straight question. It's about having someone who's had a backstory. You listen to the people here tonight. They've all had proper jobs in their lives. You look at the front bench of many of these political parties, indeed, Labour with Miliband, the Tories with Cameron, the Liberal Democrats with Clegg. How can you legislate, ladies and gentlemen, for working men and working women if you've never had a proper job in your life? And it's because we say what we mean and we mean what we say. And sometimes it might be unpalatable to the right-on metropolitan North London set who like to quaff on their Chateau Neuf de Pape, sitting round their dinner parties in Islington. And of course, these are the people who set the parameters of debate. I'll give you an example of the shock and horror, the fake, the mock outrage. What Farage said last week in the debate, when he spoke about allowing people into the country with dangerous diseases. Are we mad to allow this to happen? This is costing the NHS over £1 billion every single year. 60%, for example, of HIV sufferers in Britain today were born in Africa, not in this country. And they will say, Leanne Wood said, the leader of Plaid Cymru, you should be ashamed of yourself. Ashamed of himself? Well, Australia do it. New Zealand do it. Canada do it. All of these countries, Israel do it. They have minimum health requirements. 42 countries across the globe do it. It makes no sense, ladies and gentlemen, to be importing dangerous, incurable diseases to this country when our NHS is suffering at the moment and people who need cancer drugs can't get them, who are born here, who've paid into the system all of their lives. Yesterday I was at the defence launch and we were talking about issues surrounding the military in this country. And unlike the other parties, our defence spokesman is actually a former commando. He's an MEP for Yorkshire. He's served in the military himself. He's linked into veterans organisations. And we made it perfectly clear yesterday that, one, we believe that the military covenant in this country is not being adhered to. The military covenant is an agreement between the people of this country and the people who go out and serve and fight on our behalf. And that agreement is that we will look after them when they return home. There is a scandalous amount of veterans in this country. It's estimated that 1 in 10, for example, homeless people in Britain today are veterans. That cannot be right, ladies and gentlemen. And UKIP has gave a clear commitment that anyone who served in the armed forces in this country for 12 years or more will get a job either in the police force, in the prison service, or wherever, because we genuinely believe that people who go out and fight on our behalf and put their lives on the line deserve to be looked after when they return home. We gave a clear commitment as well, the only political party in Britain today, that we would maintain 2% of total overall spending in this country on defence. It's a commitment that we gave to NATO because we believe that the first duty of any government is the defence of its own people. But equally, ladies and gentlemen, the other parties will say, well, how will you pay for this? Because it's going to cost roughly around £3 billion every single year. Well, it's quite easy really, isn't it? Some people in the party have said that how we should describe it is a reallocation or a redirection of funds. I don't really go along that line. I like to straight talk. I would like to say I would cut. And I would cut like a knife through butter. And let me tell you where I will cut first. At the moment, we are spending £32 million a day on foreign aid. That is your taxation. That is £12 billion a year, soon to rise to £15 billion a year. Now, I don't have a bleeding heart. I believe we should be giving foreign aid to countries that need it, countries where there has been an Ebola crisis, countries, for example, where there are starving children in Africa, as long as the money goes to those starving children and not to dictators. But equally, I don't believe for a second that we should be giving foreign aid to China, which is going to be the largest economy on the planet by 2050, which spends roughly over £100 billion a year on its own armed forces. I don't believe we should be giving foreign aid to Argentina, which saber-rattles over the Falklands and has just bought a load of jets off Russia. I don't believe we should be giving foreign aid to Brazil, which has overtaken us in the League of Economic Powers. And I don't believe we should be giving foreign aid to India, which has its own space programme. It sent a rocket to Mars only 2 years ago. It has its own nuclear programme. It has more millionaires and billionaires than ourselves. There is nothing racist and nothing xenophobic about saying, ladies and gentlemen, when 1 million of our own people last year had to go to food banks, there is nothing wrong with saying charity begins at home. And equally, we made it clear yesterday at the defence launch that we have been the anti-war party from the start. We were opposed to the war in Iraq. Not because we're some sort of bleeding-hearted liberals or doves. It's because we realise that if you remove secular dictators in these Middle Eastern countries, what comes next is generally going to be worse. And what does come next? You've seen it in Iraq. You've seen it in Libya when we removed Gaddafi. What have you got now in Libya? Well, you've got 140 tribes with scores to settle. We armed these rebels and they thanked us by smashing up British war graves in Benghazi. You've got the government of Libya having to meet on a boat because it's so dangerous. You've got a humanitarian crisis where people are trying to escape and make their way into Europe via Sicily. And why are they doing this? Because the country is overrun by Islamic fundamentalists. It's happening in Syria and Iraq now. And if Cameron and Haig would have got their way 2 years ago, we would have been arming these rebels in Syria without ever working out who these rebels actually were. Well, who did they turn out to be? Well, they turned out to be the Al-Nusra Front. They turned out to be Al-Qaeda. They turned out to be ISIS. And so if they would have got their way, ISIS would be killing people now with the British weapons that we would have given them. It was madness, and we said it at the time. And what we say in UKIP is, yes, let's have a strong armed forces. Let's have an army which is 100,000 people. Because at the moment, the army has less people in it than are in jail in this country. We want an army which is there to protect our own citizens. We want an army that is there to be deployed, but we will only ever deploy our boys and girls in the armed services when it is in the British national interest, and it hasn't been for the past decade, ladies and gentlemen. We've touched on immigration. Simple common sense. How can you allow 624,000 people into your country? That's a gross figure from last year. That is a city the size of Liverpool and Aberdeen put together. The net figure, as was said earlier, is 300,000 people. A city the size of Hull. And Mr. Cameron said, back in 2010, if I don't get that net figure down to the tens of thousands, you can sack me. Well, Mr. Cameron, you have not done your job, you have failed, and you deserve to be sacked. But we have 850,000 young people who are unemployed at the moment. And what we're saying in UK, again, is simple common sense. We want an Australian points-based system whereby if you have the skills that this country needs, yes, please come here and work, but we will never, ever, ever allow people to take out of the system without ever putting in first. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to start getting our own people back into work, and when we say British jobs for British workers, we actually mean it. Yeah. And you hear Labour talk about how they're going to get tough on immigration. What a joke. Yes. These people must have more front than Selfridges. They allowed 3 million people to come into this country between 1997 and 2010, and they never asked anybody whether it was what they wanted. It was never in their manifesto in 97, or in 2001, or in 2005. Because if it was, I think they pretty much would have known the answer. But what they did cleverly is they shut down any debate on immigration. And they shut it down by screaming racist at anyone who questioned the figures. And it was never about race. It was always about numbers and space. But they shut it down. And they shut it down for politically correct reasons. And you couldn't question their drive for multiculturalism. And if you did, they would call you xenophobe. They would call you racist. And what happened as a result of shutting down this debate? What happened as a result of not being able to question multiculturalism? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Rotherham, Rochdale, Derby, Oxford. They shut down debate and they let down young girls all over this country. And they should be held accountable for their own failures. And people who say UKIP are somehow racist, well, let me just throw this figure out at you. UKIP have over 75 candidates from ethnic backgrounds. That is more than the Liberal Democrats and the Greens put together. That is more than the Conservative Party. And our immigration policy is actually ethical and non-racist, because we want people to come from India and from the West Indies and from the Far East. And it is all down to skills. But what we would do is we would shut the door to the 450 million people within the European Union who have the right to come. I'm telling you now, someone who is low skilled from Romania does not have the right to come here more than a brain surgeon from India. And I don't care what colour you are, what culture you're from, what religion you are. Quite frankly, under UKIP's policy, if you've got the skills, everyone will be treated the same. Yeah. And UKIP want to stand up for England. We want to be the party that rebalances the union. Did anyone see Sturgeon last week? Yeah. Doing fantastic on the debate? Yeah, she was good. Well, it's very easy, isn't it, to be fantastic and be anti-austerity and be anti-cuts when you're spending someone else's money. Yeah. And whose money are they spending? Ours. Well, it's ours. English. In Scotland, they get £1,400 more per head from the British Treasury than we get down here. That allows them not to have tuition fees. They can send their kids to university for free. They don't have prescriptions fees. They don't have hospital car parking. We do. We pay. And what we're saying in UKIP is that this money is divvied out by something called the Barnett formula, which is out of date. And indeed, Joel Barnett, the guy who put it together, has said it should be ripped up. It should be ripped up. The union should be balanced. We should have equality for the English. And ladies and gentlemen, we genuinely believe that will save us £5 billion every single year, which we believe should be then reinvested in the NHS. I'm an MEP, not an MP, and I spend quite a bit of time out in the European Union. I'm going to say a few words about the EU now. MEPs have very little power. We're not like MPs. Think of the European Union itself as the opposite of what goes on here in Britain. In Britain, the people who make the laws are the people who are elected. They then hand the legislation up to an unelected chamber to amend the laws. In Brussels, it's the other way round. 28 European commissioners meet in secret in a building about a mile away from the European Parliament, called the Belmont Building. They hand the legislation down to the European Parliament to amend, to reject, which never really happens at all, or to wave through. Now, I think this is fundamentally wrong and undemocratic, and we in UKIP believe that is the case. We don't believe it can be right that these 28 people who are unelected and meet in secret now account for 70% of the laws of this land. This election is about 30%. Now, I put it to you, did we really fight 2 world wars in the last century? Did we really send our boys up into the air over the south of England in the Battle of Britain? Did we really send our boys onto the beaches in France on D-Day for 70% of our laws now to be made in a foreign country by foreign unelected commissioners in secret? I don't believe we did. And what we're saying in UKIP is that the politicians in the latter half of the last century and at the start of this century gave away something that was never theirs to give. Yeah. They gave away British sovereignty, and we are committed in the first half of this century to taking it back. Yeah. And of course you have to pay for this. It's costing us £55 million every single day. Now, I don't know whether you heard this morning, I must say I'm so bored of this election already. I mean, and if I'm the deputy leader of UKIP and I'm bored off my head by getting up every morning saying, putting on breakfast TV, oh, Mr Miliband saying this today, or Mr Cameron saying this today. We've had it since the 1st of January. Well, today, Mr Miliband's statement is about non-doms, and that they're going to ban non-doms, and they're going to save £135 million, it's estimated, by banning non-doms, even though non-doms, by the way, still account for 6% of the overall tax bill of this country at the moment. But they're going to save £135 million. That is only 2.5 days that we spend on our contributions to the European Union. I mean, it is nonsensical. And what do we get back from it? Well, we get half of the money back, and then they tell us how we can spend our own money. So if you walk around Liverpool or Manchester, or indeed Preston, you'll see buildings with signs up, won't you? Even in Blackburn, thank the European Union. This project was built with European money. There is no such thing as European money. £55 million a day goes out there. We get about £25 million back. They then tell us how we can spend our own money. And the rest of it is building motorways in Romania. It built a sewage system in Budapest. It built an underground in Warsaw. And what we're saying in UKIP is it's a bit like foreign aid, isn't it? That £55 million a day is your taxation. And it will be better spent on our schools, on our hospitals, on our transport network, and ensuring that our boys and girls in the armed forces have the best equipment possible. But of course, Mr Cameron is offering a referendum on this issue. Well, there's a number of problems with this. One, he offered a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, only to renege on it after the 2009 European elections. He's also talking about renegotiation. How can you renegotiate, ladies and gentlemen, with an organisation that has already told you it does not want to renegotiate? He's been told by Merkel, he's been told by Hollande, he's been told by Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the Commission, he's been told by Tusk, the President of the Council. What is he afraid of, ladies and gentlemen? And what we're saying in UKIP is we want a referendum, but we don't want it in 2017. when another £50 billion of our hard-earned cash has been handed over to a corrupt organisation which hasn't had its account signed off for 19 years on the bounce. We want a referendum, but we want that referendum before December the 31st this year, because let's not forget, when you voted in 1975, unless, you know, if you're under 58, you know how to vote on this issue. But when you voted in 75 in the referendum, you were told it was about trade. You didn't vote for an EU flag. You didn't vote for an EU anthem. You didn't vote for an EU army, which they're now talking about. You didn't vote for £55 million a day. You didn't vote for open borders. You didn't vote for 70% of our laws now made in Brussels. You were hoodwinked in 1975, and it is now time to right that wrong. We want a referendum, but we want it now. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I can see that I've got over my time already. Time flies when you love the sound of your own voice. No, seriously, thank you for coming tonight to listen to this fantastic array of speakers. I will finish by saying this. Something is changing in British politics today. The two-party system of the last century is gone. It's over. Yeah. Forget it. Finished. Yeah. Last week's debate proved that. The age of multi-party politics has arrived. And it is exciting because we can really change things. And UKIP is at the forefront of that. And we are on a journey. The People's Army is on the march. And we're not going to go away. This isn't some here today, gone tomorrow political organisation. This is a long-term project to change not just politics in this country, but society for the better. So if you are a member of UKIP, you've done a fantastic job already, but the work is really just beginning. If you're not a member of UKIP, get on board. Join the People's Army, because I guarantee what you'll be joining is the most exciting political movement, probably since the birth of the Labour Party under Keir Hardie. We are going to change things, ladies and gentlemen. We've got the establishment on the run. Ladies and gentlemen, join the People's Army and let's change things in this country for the better. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. We have a man here, Mike, and he has a mic. Yes. He has a roving mic for anybody who wishes to ask the questions of the panel. You can ask any questions as long as it's about politics or Grand National, and whoever feels most capable of answering the question will do so. So, does anyone have a question? There's a lady at the back there.
Yes, I'll go over to him.
He's on his way.
I have lots of friends who want to vote UKIP, but are worried that if they vote UKIP, it could let Labour in, and it's a big problem for them. Just like what people's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay, that question was from Karen.
Look, do you know, if everyone thought like that, and everyone went down that line, things would never change. And you would end up with the stale, old, two-party system that we already have at Westminster at the moment. One that the media want to maintain, and that's why you're reading the scare stories in the Mail and the Telegraph and all the rest of it, which says, if you vote UKIP, you will get Labour. Look, the simple fact is that if enough people go out and vote UKIP, you will get UKIP. And this is a movement which is on the march. And I sincerely believe that it will not stall. If you look at where UKIP's votes come from, and we've done a lot of polling on this, what you find is that, yes, we do take about 40% of votes from people who once voted Conservative. But there is a strong proportion of people, and growing, who are ex-Labour. And indeed, a few who are ex-Lib Dem. And 20% of people who vote UKIP haven't voted for the past 20 years. So what we're doing is we're re-engaging people in the political process, which is good for democracy. But what I will say is that Mr Cameron obviously hasn't read the polls, because they show that 75% of people who vote UKIP will never, ever vote Conservative again. Yeah. They've left the Conservative Party, they feel the Conservative Party have left them, and they are never going back. People want change in this country, and the only way you're going to get it is by going out in constituencies like this and voting UKIP. And as I say, if we don't make the breakthrough this year in 2015, we'll be back for the local elections, we'll be back for the European election in 2019, and indeed, we will make mega breakthroughs in 2020. So tell your friends, please, if enough people of them vote UKIP, you'll get UKIP.
Right, it's okay. At the back again. If you're thinking of some questions, don't let them get off lightly. Make sure they answer.
Hi, good evening. My name is Bernie. You touched on the Barnet formula. I'd like to ask you about the West Lothian question. Paul.
That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, I've been pretty outspoken about this within UKIP. If anyone who was a member of UKIP may well know, the problem is that the Scottish are overrepresented at Westminster. We know that in terms of their MPs. It went from, I think it was 75 down to 55 back in the late 90s. It probably should go further. But equally, the problem that we have is that when devolution happened, and many people like myself, and I'm guessing a lot of people in this room, didn't want devolution to happen in the first place. But we are where we are now, whether we like it or not. And the devolution genie is never, ever going to be put back in the bottle. You see, the Scottish are never going to give up their parliament. The Welsh are never going to give up their assembly. In fact, they had a referendum about increasing powers for the Welsh assembly, which they won. And indeed, the Northern Irish are never going to give up Stormont. I ran the UKIP Northern Ireland campaign in 2011. I spent half my life basically out in Northern Ireland, and that is never, ever going to go. What we need to do is we need to ensure we have fairness for the English. Yes. And the first step to do that is to ensure that Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish MPs are not allowed in the chamber when English-only issues are debated and voted on. We believe in English votes for English laws, and I personally believe, and this isn't party policy, that this can only be the first step towards some form of an English Parliament, and then we will truly have a proper federal UK where non-devolved issues are dealt with at a federal level, such as defence and foreign policy, and everything else, such as the environment, education, the National Health Service, is dealt with at a devolved issue. But equally, we must ensure that we have equality for the English, because I don't believe the real threat to this great union that we have, which is the real union which has given us peace and prosperity for the past 300 years, is coming from Scotland. If you look at the opinion polls, actually, in the end, the English are getting fed up. We're getting fed up, handing money over Adrian's wall, our taxation, and in the end, I'm afraid, we will say enough is enough. The only way you're going to do it is by rebalancing the union, by having English votes for English laws, and ripping up the Barnet formula altogether. Yeah.
My name's Tom.
I live between Whalley and Clitheroe. I'm retired. I have some experience as a school governor over a great number of years. Finished becoming chairman. We were a successful primary school in our local area and became a very successful academy. Could you comment, please, on private schools and size of classes? I have opinion on both. I'd like to hear someone from the panel what their view is. Thank you.
Okay, anybody who'd like to take that one?
I can take that. Do you know, the independent sector and the private sector do a fantastic job in this country. You know, let's not make any bones about that. You know, 7% of people in Britain are educated in the private sector, yet they dominate, absolutely dominate, the upper echelons of society. You know, if you look at MPs, if you look at Lords, if you look at law, if you look at other professions, judges, for example, an immense amount of them have gone to private schools. And my issue with this isn't the fact that they're doing a great job. It's the fact that social mobility in this country stagnated in the 1970s. So much so now that we have a situation where the top 5 schools in Britain send more kids to Oxbridge than the bottom 2,000 put together. That cannot, under any circumstances, be right. It can't be right that there were more working class kids at Oxbridge in the 1960s than there is now. Why is social mobility stagnated? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. I'll give you another statistic. Do you know how many kids went to Oxbridge from North Liverpool last year? North Liverpool, a city of 550,000 people. Do you consider that the North is around 250,000 people? No. And all those schools? 2.
That's right.
2. How can that be right? It can't. And the reason why it's gone wrong is because we did away with academic selection in the 1970s. And let's not just blame Labour for this, although the Education Secretary at the time was Tony Crossland, who said that he wanted to close every effing grammar school in the country. The Education Secretary, who closed more grammar schools than anybody else, was indeed Margaret Thatcher. And it was a Conservative government who did this. The simple fact is, we deserve to give, we should be giving working class kids the same opportunities as middle class kids. And that isn't happening at the moment. I went to one of the worst schools probably in Britain. That's the way I was brought up in the docks in Nuttall. And there were boys and girls in my class who should have gone on to be teachers, to be accountants, to be solicitors. And they didn't. And the reason why they didn't is because their parents were poor. Because they ended up in the bog standard comprehensive school. If they lived 3 miles up the road in Crosby, or 7 miles up the road in Formby, they would have gone to a good school and they would have had better opportunities in life. And that is not right, because at the moment in society, we have education by wealth and not ability. And we are determined to put that right and give working class kids the same opportunity as middle class kids and get social mobility moving again in this country. And the only way you're going to do that, by making a start, is by putting a grammar school in every single town in Britain. On class sizes, well, again, I return back to my old friend, immigration. You know, if you're going to allow 300,000 people net to come into your country, you're going to, this is last year alone, or 3 million under Labour, you're going to have a problem with class sizes. Indeed, the Local Government Association only last week said that they're going to struggle next September to fit all the kids into classes. The way you deal with class sizes, I'm afraid, is quite simple. You deal with immigration. You cut the numbers back to a sensible size. And we're not talking 300,000 a year at the moment, net. We're talking 30,000 net, like it was between 1945 roughly and 1997. If you take the numbers back to those levels, you will sort out class sizes in this country, and I genuinely believe that it should be illegal, even though Labour went down this road in 2001, it should be illegal to have class sizes over 30, and in an ideal world, I would take it down to 20 personally.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something to that. The area I grew up in, I've got an older brother who was 2 years older than me, and they scrapped the grammar school in our area after he did his 11 plus. He went on to a grammar school with 400 people. He went to university, the first member of our family to go to university, and he did very well. I missed out by a year, and there was no 11 plus, so I went to a bog standard comprehensive, as they refer to, with 1,200 people in. And the standard of teaching I got was completely different than the standard of teaching he got. So I didn't go to university. I didn't get the grades to do it. I left school at 16 and went to work. And as well as being better looking than my brother, I also think I'm equally intelligent.
Okay, is there anybody else like to ask the panel a question? Jeanette. I got the name right.
If we do have the referendum and we vote to leave, as we all hope, how will our exit from the European Union be achieved? And how long will it take?
Well, firstly, we would rip up the European Communities Act. But equally, there is a mechanism via the Lisbon Treaty called Article 50, which is the mechanism to leave. It will then be a 2-year period of negotiation, which we will enter into, which we will then extricate ourselves from the European Union, and I then genuinely believe that we would sign a free trade deal with our European partners, and that's when the whole argument of 3 million jobs will be lost, will be put to bed. Because although there are 3 million jobs in this country which are dependent on trade with the European Union, there are over 6 million jobs on the continent which are dependent with British trade. And let's not forget, we run a huge trading deficit with the European Union, and let's not forget who really runs it, Germany. Who are Germany's biggest marketplace? It's Britain. In terms of cars, Mercedes, BMWs, Volkswagens. There is going to be a free trade deal on the table that will benefit us. Then, what can we do? We can then begin to sign free trade deals all over the world. We can get our seat back on the World Trade Organization. We can make our links again with the people who we turned our back on in the 1970s. We can sign free trade deals with India, which is one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. We can sign free trade deals with Australia, New Zealand, Canada, some of the most stable economies on the planet. We can sign free trade deals with China, with the United States. It will then be in our own hands. But we've got to win that referendum first. We've got to get out, and to do so, it will probably take 2 years to extricate ourselves through Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. But once we do that, we will be a freer, better and more democratic nation.
There's currently 3,600 pieces of EU legislation that have come through. That's going to take some time to go through every single piece of legislation, look at it. Do we actually want it? Does it actually benefit Britain? If it doesn't, it goes. That's not going to happen overnight. We're going to have a lot of work to do to sort out the mess.
I think also another point on trade. I run a small business in Lancashire. I employ 30 people, and everything we make is exported. We don't sell anything in Britain because of a change to electricity tariffs and privatisation. So we sell everything overseas. We sell some things in Europe. Most of our trade goes to places like Iraq and the Middle East. And what I've found in the last 15 to 20 years is that whilst the idea of the common market back in the 70s, I think, was a fantastic idea, because of the level of trade barriers that were in place in those days, a lot of those trade barriers just don't exist anymore. It is no harder to buy a product from Turkey than it is from Germany. No harder at all. A lot of the trade barriers that are talked about a lot of the requirements make it so difficult to do trade aren't true. In terms of the 3 million jobs claim, if anybody seriously thinks that a company in Germany buys a product from Britain because we're in the EU, they really do need a head exam in my opinion. They buy it if we give the best quality at the best price. We are one of the few countries in the EU who actually obey the rules. When it comes to public tenders, everybody gets an equal chance. If you go to France, you'll find that's not quite the same. You get an equal chance as long as you're French. Some people think that's wrong. I personally think that's pretty good. I think Germany follows a similar pattern in that they favour German suppliers. I think that's a good thing. Germany managed to completely avoid the restrictions on the European brewing industry in terms of avoiding monopolies by pushing a 15th century beer purity law, which means that beer, when it's brewed, can't be moved more than a certain number of miles. So you go to Germany, you find 2 or 3 breweries in even a small town. I think that's a particularly good idea, and one I'm sure UKIP would support. That's an argument I've had with a lot of people on the doorstep canvassing in Chorley, is about, well, we're worried if we leave the EU, it will damage us for business. I personally don't believe it will, and the figures don't bear out that it will either.
Okay, we've just got one more question from some of the younger people who have come here this evening, so I think it's only right that we take their question.
Hi, I'm Sean. I've just got a couple of questions on the HS2. When you talk about adding extra carriages and stuff, why wouldn't you want to upgrade the infrastructure in the first place when the other ones, in my opinion, are outdated? And why would you want to spend the money, 50 billion or whatever it is, on current ones when you can, upgrade it to a better service?
No, it's a very good question. Obviously, I mean, if we had the money, we'd replace everything, wouldn't we? It just depends on the budget that's available. The HS2 project that's going to cost £50 billion is not going to provide any gains for us here in the northwest, really, is it? I mean, quite frankly, it's an absolute joke. Most of the linkage doesn't reach this far. There's an HS3 project that's planned as well. That's the one that stretches up to Cumbria. They are going to actually start this project in 2017. It's horrific to think that without the mandate of the country, they're pressing ahead with this. Most of the people in the Conservative Party don't even support it either. I mean, Patrick McLaughlin, I've spoken to Patrick McLaughlin, the Minister for Transport, and tried to lobby him to say, look, don't go ahead with this. There's a small clique in the Conservative Party in Westminster, the Westminster establishment, that are going ahead with this. Now, what we would do to get rid of we'd spend the money that we'd save from not having HS2, we'd scrap HS2, UKIP want to scrap it, and spend the money elsewhere. We'd spend the money, the question, I know you're saying you don't want to upgrade you'd rather replace the stock, the existing stock with better trains. Well, I'd love to have trains like, if you've gone abroad to France or Germany and seen the trains out there, absolutely fantastic trains that go, aren't they? I mean, but look at the train that runs from Preston to Ormskirk. Look at the trains that run from Burscough to Manchester. It's completely outdated cattle truck. It's an absolute joke. The train that goes from Burscough to Manchester.
You're allowing people to move and commute to places like London and bigger cities where you can get better travel.
I'll tell you what, I'll answer this because I've got a bit of experience from high-speed rail. Working in Strasbourg, I must say, it used to take us about 3.5 hours, a bit longer actually, 3:45, to get from Paris to Strasbourg. They put in the high-speed rail, TGV. You want to see them? They're absolutely unbelievable, double-deckers. And, I'll tell you how fast these things are. I've taken photographs because they show you the speed that they're going. And it gets up to 319 kilometres. I mean, you're literally poof through the countryside. And they've cut that time down now to about 2 hours 20 from Strasbourg to Paris. So they've cut off way over an hour, probably about an hour and 20 minutes. But let's not forget how big France is. It's huge. If you look at the TGV down from Paris to Marseille, for example, You know, it's cut off about 2.5 hours from that journey. But here's the problem. It's now only an hour from Lille to Paris since it's gone in, right? And here's the problem. Lille's economy has plummeted. And why it's plummeted is because Lille has become pretty much now a suburb of Paris.
Yeah.
So all those companies that had subsidiary offices in Lille actually just shut them down and moved everything into Paris because everyone could commute then into Paris. And the same has happened in Osaka in Japan. Now the problem that you've got with HS2 is this as well, is that in terms of capacity the figures just don't add up. The problem that you've got coming out of Euston, and I, by the way, think the Pendolino trains, the Virgin ones, are pretty good.
Yeah, they are.
The problem that you've got is at 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock, you've either got to be working for the public sector and getting your fares paid, or you've got to be a big businessman, because the fares are completely and utterly out of control.
Yeah.
For example, for me to go to London, return first class, is 420 quid. I can get to New York cheaper than that.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Only 36% of those trains, 36% of seats are taken at peak time on Virgin trains leaving Euston. But then you look at the trains at 2 o'clock and 7 o'clock. The 7 o'clock one, everyone's running like mad, and people are standing in the corridors, aren't they? Because it's the first off-peak train. That's the problem. The problem is the peak fares. If you reduce the peak time, you reduce the fares, you do away with the capacity problem. And I don't believe, for example, that it's worth spending 50 billion quid to get a train to run 15 minutes quicker to Birmingham from London, when everyone's working on the train anyway, on the laptops and the iPads. I would rather reinvest that money, that 50 billion quid, into the Preston to Ormskirk line, into the line up to Lancaster, into ensuring that our local networks are improved, because many of them are running on diesel lines, which is just way out of date. The one that actually makes more sense, by the way, and I haven't given any commitment on this either way, is the HS3 thing, which will run hopefully from Liverpool all the way to Hull, because transport north to south in Britain isn't too bad. Transport east to west is terrible. It's a joke. And what we also need to do is to reinvest this money in our transport network in terms of motorways. If you're in London, it's great if you're in the south east, you've got motorways here, there and everywhere. If I want to get from Manchester to Sheffield, which is going from the 3rd biggest city in the UK to the 6th biggest city in the UK, I either have to drive all the way up to Leeds and then all the way down the M1, or I have to risk my life going over the Woodhead Pass. I mean, it is completely nuts. They started the motorway called the M67 back in the 1970s. It got from Manchester to Hyde. It was meant to go all the way to Sheffield. I would reinvest and build that motorway. I would also ensure that the 8-foot 850 from the M6 to Derby and Nottingham became a motorway, the M50. This is where I would reinvest my money. I would ensure that the A1 became an M1, all the way from Leeds up to Newcastle. A69 from Carlisle to Newcastle. You know, it's crazy, it's a single lane. It should be doubled. This is where the money should be reinvested, not on a vanity project, which is HS2, which is there to benefit one place and one place alone. It's there to benefit London. It's got nothing to do with us up here. It's all to do with London. And let's not forget, London gets enough in this country. London gets £5,500 per head spent on it on infrastructure. Right? Up here in the northwest, if you take Sellafield out altogether, it's 250 quid a head. It's a joke. London gets enough. Let's reinvest and ensure that local networks get their fair share.
Yes, Paul has to go now, so thank you very much for coming, Paul. Thank you very much. Are there any more questions now for these 3 candidates up here before we wrap up for the evening? Any local questions? Anybody want to know about that terrible road, Southport Road in Chorley, which they've made into a pothole lane? Terrible place.
We've got one more over
We've got
here.
one more.
Hi, National Health Service. I was talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago working in the National Health Service, and we were talking about the use of consultants doing private work in National Health Service time, and then pushing the patients back into the National Health Service again. Views on that, please. Instead of spending the money and making them work for the National Health Service, doing 100% of their time for the Health Service.
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong. There's so many things wrong with the NHS, and it's not going to fix it overnight. One of those is, like you say, consultants who are private consultants who are taking NHS patients. There's nothing wrong with having a private service where you can pay for it, but that shouldn't be at the NHS patients shouldn't be the ones who are paying twice, if you like, because it's still having to be paid. The consultant is still being paid from the NHS budget. Well, hang on a minute. If they're a private consultant, then they deal with private patients. If they want to deal with NHS patients, then they deal in the NHS. We shouldn't be paying a consultant private rates for NHS. It's just wrong, really, really wrong. There's so many bits, like the agency staff, that is affecting morale because they can get away with doing a lot less than the ones who are actually employed by the NHS. We have to train more of our own medical personnel. It's as simple as that. When my father was a paramedic for 25 years. That service, just to give you an example, the ambulance service calls have increased by 3.6% year on year for the last 10 years. But the number of ambulances on the road has been reduced by 5%. You cannot cut frontline services. A lot of the reason why we've got backlogs in A&E is because you can't get to see your GP unless you know you're going to be sick 2 weeks in advance. We need to get more of our own trained, and we need to help some of these students. When student nurses first came on as SENs, they had accommodation where when they were working night shifts, they weren't travelling home at 2 AM in the morning when their shift ended. They went straight to the nurses' digs or the doctor's digs, and they were safe. Those accommodation has all been scrapped, and part of it's now been turned into car parking because that's where they make some money. So we have got to fix these situations where we give our young people the opportunity to join. And we also need to make it so that some of our doctors and our GPs who've left the service to have a family have a chance to come back. Currently, any GP or any of the nursing staff who want to return to the industry, they have to sit refresher exams. And they have to pay for them themselves. And they are in the thousands. It's not a couple of £100 to reset these. These are in the £1,000 to do each module. It is a disgrace. We are crying out for medical staff, and yet we are putting barriers in place so that they can't come back. We've a lot of work to do.
I'd like to add a small point to that one. You read sometimes stories about the cost of agency workers, including doctors, in the NHS. So your comment about consultants being free to do private work in NHS time is relevant to that, in that the NHS in some hospitals is paying almost £1,500 a day for somebody when a doctor is available to do that work, but he's away doing private work somewhere else, and that's clearly nonsense. And I think, to me, that we should stop.
Well, that's the fault of the trust, not going so to clamp down on it and get a grip of the staff that's working for them. They control the strings, they should kick the backside and sort it out.
I agree, but what you've got to, I think what you've got to look at is what I said before, what you incentivise is what you get. if you look at the way that they target their expenditure, that's one of the reasons why it's actually more cost effective to go overseas to recruit staff than it is to train them. I think that whole incentivisation system needs to be looked at there to make it more focused on what it should be, which is care.
We've one more, Jeff. One more. They've been over this side being very quiet all evening, so I'm not letting them get away with it.
It was just on the NHS when you mentioned about the overseas. Got the Trust Matters magazine this morning from Lancashire teaching hospitals. They've actually taken on 8 Italian nurses and are going to recruit more. Do we not have any nurses in our own area that we can possibly take on rather than going abroad? Have they not been trained at all?
Well, can I just answer that, because I read the same magazine. I was surprised that in the magazine they made a big announcement that they are going to train 50 nurses.
That's right.
I thought that's what they were supposed to do anyway, but they were announcing this as though it was a new development that they're training 50 nurses. And you're quite right, they're going over to Italy to recruit some more Italian nurses. And very nice they look too.
One other point on that is, if you look at some of the other countries that use immigrant workers to fill skill needs, you know, as I mentioned, deal a lot in the Middle East. Now, places like Saudi Arabia are the most developed places in the world in terms of this kind of thinking. However, they will have immigrant workers in, engineers, doctors, nurses, but when they identify we've got a need for 10,000 doctors, they'll bring 10,000 doctors in, and at the same time, they'll start to train 10,000 doctors. And those people who come in to fill that need are there for the time that they need them. And in this country, we've stopped doing that. We rely to a very high degree on this issue of bringing immigrant workers in. There's nothing wrong with that when you need the skills, but it shouldn't stop us training our own young people to do that. And as Shirley mentioned before about the tuition fees, knocking away tuition fees for things like medical degrees is going to have a big impact on the appetite for young people to go and take those degrees.
Just to say a little on why we don't have our own doctors, one of the big things that UKIP would like to introduce is to scrap tuition fees at universities for students of medicine, provided that they stay in the UK and carry on for 5 years and pay back. I think it's an excellent thing that we need to get a grip of. I mean, I go back to the first time I was at university, and it was free in the 80s. We had grants then for people to go to university, so it wasn't whether you were poor, rich or anything else. People got there on ability a lot more than nowadays, where, quite frankly, a higher percentage of more affluent families get to university. They do. I think to get our own British trained staff again in universities, in hospitals, is what we need to aim for. What appalls me about the NHS is the fact that the management structure of it, you've got all these tiers of management with people earning 40, 50 to 60,000 pounds a year just to administer things which they didn't need administering in the first place. You know, it's just an absolute scandal, and it seems to be, from what I've seen across the health service, the same in the police force. I'm afraid to say, you know, they neglect the frontline services, and they've got all these whole tiers of management, you know, in hospitals, these trusts. They're all, I mean, I see them sat on trains, you know, commandeering whole areas, just you know, with a laptop, and you know, to pay someone like that £55,000 a year just to do that, you know, it's just unbelievable. The resources should be spent elsewhere.
Any more, Mike?
Any more? Just following up on that one, at the Chorley campaign office, we had a nurse in only last weekend and her husband, and she was telling us there, and we learned quite a bit, that she said she'd been in nursing that long that she remembered having one manager and a matron in the hospital to look after the wards. And what she's got now, and I was absolutely amazed by it, was 14 line managers. And she has to go to 14 different people if she's got the different issues. And she said, do you know, most of them aren't capable of actually doing the job they've got. So that's where money is being wasted in our health service, or it's one of the circumstances. One manager, one matron to 14 line managers. It's disgraceful. Okay, any more questions?
Well, I think we'd better wrap it up for the evening now. It's 9:15. I'm sure everybody's desperate to get to the bar or get home. So thank you very much for coming. But don't forget, we in Chorley do have a shop in the centre of Chorley. So call in and see us. We're open at the moment Tuesday, Thursday and Saturdays, and Mark's there every Saturday, and we're going to be extending the opening times of the shop to 6 days because we're importing a French student. That's how anti-European we are, and she's starting with us on the 13th of April, and she's going to be helping us to run the shop. So call in and see us if you're passing centre of Chorley, opposite the Market Tavern.
And somebody's taken a lot of time to put leaflets and booklets on this table here, so feel free to take away with you any of the information that you think is relevant that might answer some more questions. Yeah, and if you'd like to help us with